Ethan Cole, a man forged in war and tempered by loss, sought silence in the frozen mountains of Wyoming. His only companion was Rex, a 7-year-old German shepherd whose loyalty had survived more battles than most men. For 3 years, Ethan lived among the whispering pines and snow-laden winds, nursing the memory of his brother's death and the ticking of a broken watch that had stopped at 3:47. But when a blizzard swept through Wind River, bringing with it a wounded stranger and a secret marked Dry Ridge, that silence began to crack. What followed was not just survival, it was redemption written in ice and blood. Please support us by subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, and sharing this story with someone who still believes that even in the coldest winters, God's light can still be found. The wind moved like a living thing through the Wyoming mountains, low and mournful, as if warning the valley below that winter had finally come to collect its debt. Ethan Cole stood on the porch of his small log cabin, staring at the horizon where the ridgeline carved a jagged scar across the pale sky. He was 40, but the mountain years had carved him older, lines at the corners of his eyes, a salt and pepper beard that had forgotten the razor, skin tanned and cracked from seasons of sun and frost. He wore a worn tan-brown Carhartt work jacket, a dark flannel beneath, jeans faded by labor and weather. His frame was lean, the endurance-built kind. In his eyes, steel blue, quiet, unreadable, lay the patience of a man who had waited too long for answers that would never come. He lifted his coffee mug, steam rising against the cold. The liquid had gone lukewarm, but he drank anyway. Routine mattered more than warmth. It kept his hand steady, kept the ghosts from crowding in. Behind him, inside the cabin, a faint ticking echoed, the fractured heartbeat of a pocket watch that hadn't moved in 3 years. Rex padded out through the half-open door, paws soundless on frost. The dog, a German shepherd, 7 years old, his sable coat thick and streaked with black and gold, moved with calm precision. His right ear tilted forward, the left scarred at the tip from an old fight. He sat beside Ethan and surveyed the snowfield with soldierly focus. "Storm's coming, boy," Ethan muttered. Rex's tail thumped once, acknowledgement, not agreement. The cabin crouched against the slope of Wind River like something half-wild itself. Built by hand from pine and stubbornness, it had 2 rooms, 1 stove, and a roof patched so many times it looked like a map of old winters. Out front stood the stump of a pine tree Bo had cut years ago. Beside it, a small wooden marker Ethan had carved himself. Bo Cole, 1844 to 1865. Gone, but not forgotten. The snow had softened the letters, but the grief beneath them remained sharp. Ethan crouched, brushing away frost. His gloved hand lingered on the wood. "They said justice would come," he murmured. "Still waiting." He remembered the telegram, the way the sheriff couldn't meet his eyes. Ambush near Dry Ridge, 3 men dead, no suspects. His brother Bo had been trying to expose corruption within their own ranks, and for that he died with a file full of truth no one ever saw again. Ethan had stayed silent then, following orders. Silence was his sin. Rex nudged his arm gently, breaking the memory. Ethan exhaled, eyes turning north. Clouds were rolling in fast, thick, iron gray, swallowing the peaks. The storm would hit by nightfall. He stepped inside, closing the door against the cold. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, steel, and old coffee. Everything had its place. Rifle on hooks, axe by the door, wood stacked in neat order beside the stove. Order was his discipline. It was how he kept control of the world when the world refused to be controlled. On the mantel sat the pocket watch. Bo's watch, its glass cracked, its hands frozen at 3:47. Ethan lifted it, the metal biting cold against his palm. On the back, The faint engraving still showed. To Bo, from Ma, Christmas, 1862. He wound it once every winter, though it never moved. Maybe hope, maybe habit. The wind outside thickened, rattling the shutters like old bones. Ethan watched the fire until his eyes blurred. By midday, the sky had turned the color of steel. He shrugged into his coat, slung his rifle, and whistled. Rex rose immediately, tail low but ready. They set off for the trap line before the storm buried it for good. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the sound oddly steady in the emptiness. The forest closed in around them, tall pines and spruce heavy with ice, branches whispering secrets in the wind. Rex moved ahead, nose to the ground, every muscle tuned. Ethan admired him. The dog didn't question the world. He just met it head on. Halfway along the ridge, Ethan stopped to rest. His breath came out in clouds, fading into the pale distance. From there, the valley stretched wide below, Wind River winding silver through the white. It was beautiful the way a knife was beautiful, cold, perfect, merciless. He thought of Bo again, his laugh, his stubborn faith. Don't let the world harden you, E. Even steel breaks if it forgets how to bend. But Ethan had become iron instead. They finished checking the traps by dusk. Only a rabbit, half frozen. Not much, but enough. When the first flakes began to fall, slow and heavy, Ethan turned back. By the time they reached the cabin, the world had gone white. Inside again, he fed the fire and rubbed Rex's fur dry with an old towel. The dog pressed close, eyes fixed on the door. Something in his stillness made Ethan frown. "You hear it too?" he asked softly. Rex gave a low sound, not quite a growl, more a warning. Ethan froze, listening. For a moment, only the wind. Then, maybe, a faint echo, a sound carried through snow. Not thunder, not wind. Something mechanical, distant. He reached for his rifle. Stay. Moving to the window, he peered into the blur of white. The storm had grown thick, turning distance into fog. He waited, counting the beats of his heart. Then he saw it, a flicker, faint but real, deep among the trees to the north. A pulse of reflected light, like metal catching flame. Then it vanished. "Could be a car," he muttered, but his tone didn't believe it. No one came this far up the ridge in winter. Rex whined softly, pacing near the door. Ethan set the rifle down, but kept his coat on. "If it's trouble, we'll find out come morning," he said, though his eyes lingered on the window longer than he meant to. He sat at the table again, cleaning his rifle, the lamplight flickering across scarred wood. Outside, the wind roared, burying everything in silence. When he finally banked the fire and turned down the lamp, the cabin glowed dim and warm, a fragile island in an ocean of white. On the mantel, Bo's pocket watch gleamed faintly in the dark, its cracked face catching the last pulse of light from the dying flame. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, something moved, something not born of wind or snow. But Ethan Cole didn't yet know that before another sunrise, his quiet exile would end, and the past he'd buried under ice would find its way back home. By dawn, the storm had buried half the valley. Wind River lay under a thick, shifting white that erased all sound, all shape. The world seemed to have forgotten color. Ethan Cole trudged through it anyway, his rifle slung tight, scarf drawn high against the biting air. The wind cut his face like shards of glass, but the silence beneath it was worse, the silence that carried memory. Rex moved ahead, nose low, fur crusted with snow. The dog stopped often, glancing back as though reminding Ethan that they'd already gone too far. "One more ridge," Ethan muttered, "then we turn." But the ridge held something, a flicker. Too straight, too gray, jutted from the snow ahead. Rex's bark cut through the wind, sharp and alarmed. Ethan broke into a run, his boots sinking knee-deep until he reached it, a half-buried vehicle, its frame twisted against a fallen pine. A dark gray SUV, windshield shattered, steam curling from the crushed hood. Its front tires had sunk deep into a drift. Ethan's gut tightened. No one drove this road in winter, not since it had been closed after the last rock slide 2 years ago. He wrenched the door open. Snow poured inside. A woman was slumped across the steering wheel, her hair a dark tangle flecked with ice, her hands bare and bleeding. Her lips were blue. "Hey, can you hear me?" Ethan's voice sounded distant in the storm. He leaned in, fingers pressing to her neck. A pulse, faint, fragile, but there. Rex whined beside him. "Hold on," Ethan said, wrapping his arms around her and lifting. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and cold. Her parka was torn at the shoulder, blood frozen in the fabric. He carried her through the snow, each step a battle, Rex circling, barking at the wind as if warning it back. By the time they reached the cabin, Ethan's arms were numb. He kicked the door open, laid her near the stove, and stoked the fire high. Rex shook the snow from his coat, then settled near the doorway, alert. Ethan stripped the woman's gloves and boots, unzipped the parka, careful, efficient. A bullet had grazed her shoulder. He cleaned it with warm water, wrapped it tight, and covered her with every blanket he owned. Her skin was marble cold, but her breathing steadied. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow. She looked mid-30s, maybe 38, strong-featured, not delicate, a sharp jawline, lashes dark against pale skin. There were faint freckles on her nose and a small scar above her eyebrow, the kind soldiers carried home. Her clothes, though soaked, weren't random. Tactical boots, weatherproof pants, and an insulated underlayer beneath the torn parka. As Ethan hung the parka to dry, something heavy fell from the pocket. A folded map, water-stained and creased. He caught it before it hit the floor. The paper was old, hand-marked in red ink. Dry Ridge, 1201. Ethan's breath hitched. He stared at the words. The date burned into his memory, like a wound. Beau's last mission. He turned the map over, saw faded initials, M.H. He looked at the unconscious woman again. "Who the hell are you?" Hours passed before she stirred. By then, the storm had thickened, beating the roof like a drum. When she finally opened her eyes, they were gray-green, sharp even in confusion. She blinked at the fire, then at him. "Where?" "You're safe," Ethan said quietly. "You crashed near Union Pass. Lucky my dog found you." She tried to sit, but pain bent her forward. "My shoulder." "Clean graze," he said. "You'll live." Her gaze moved around the room, taking in the rifle, the uniform boots, by the door, the order of everything. "You live alone?" "Just me and the dog." She swallowed, eyes flicking to Rex, who watched her like a silent sentinel. "He doesn't trust me." "Neither do I," Ethan said. A faint smile ghosted her lips. "Fair." He offered her water, then asked, "What were you doing on that road? It's been closed for years." She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Survey work," she said. "Environmental contracting. I was mapping the old forestry routes for clearance." Ethan frowned. "In a blizzard?" She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't plan for the weather to turn that fast." Her tone was controlled, too even. Soldiers talked like that when they were lying. He didn't press. Instead, he moved to the window. The storm outside had turned the world invisible. "You'll stay till it passes," he said. "Then you can finish your survey." "Thank you," she murmured, though something in her voice sounded like guilt instead of gratitude. Later, while she slept again, Ethan studied the map by lamplight. The red circle around Dry Ridge drew his eyes again and again. He knew those coordinates, knew the ridge's shape like a scar. Why would a civilian be headed there? Rex lifted his head, ears pricking. A low growl vibrated in his chest. Ethan looked up. "What is it?" The dog stared at the window, muscles rigid. Outside, through the snow's veil, a faint flash blinked, like metal catching light, the same as last night. Ethan's fingers tightened around his rifle, but he forced himself still. Maybe it was debris from the wreck. Maybe. When the wind finally began to ease, he checked on the woman again. She was awake, propped up by the fire, watching the flames. The heat had brought color back to her face. "You got a name?" he asked. "Mara," she said after a pause. "Mara Hale." Ethan didn't respond right away. The name echoed somewhere deep, faint but familiar. He sat across from her, eyes steady. "You were military." Her jaw flexed. "A long time ago." "Army?" "Private contract," she said softly. "Overseas, mostly." He nodded once. That explained the calluses, the scar, the discipline. "You're lucky I found you." "Or unlucky," she murmured. He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She looked at the fire instead of him. "People like me don't get saved for free." Before he could answer, her gaze drifted upward, to the mantel, where Beau's pocket watch lay gleaming in the light. She stared at it for several seconds, her breathing shallow. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "It was my brother's," Ethan said. "Beau Cole." Something in her eyes flickered, shock, sorrow, something between the two. "Beau," she repeated, barely audible. "He had a watch like that. It is his." Her face went still, color draining. "Then—" She stopped herself, the silence stretched. Ethan leaned forward. "You knew him." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then she closed her eyes, shaking her head slightly. "I need rest." He didn't stop her. But as she turned away, Ethan noticed her hands trembling under the blanket, not from cold, but memory. He sat long after she drifted back into uneasy sleep. Outside, the snow howled. Inside, the only movement was the flicker of the firelight across her face, and the faint gleam of a map folded on the table, its red mark glowing like blood beneath the lamp. When the storm reached its peak, Ethan thought he heard it again. A sound buried in the wind, far away but rising, a metallic crack like something collapsing under weight. He glanced at Rex. The dog was standing now, staring at the window, tail stiff. "Yeah," Ethan whispered, "I heard it too." Somewhere beyond the ridge, something was stirring in the storm. The storm raged for another day before it began to ease. By morning, the cabin was a pale island buried chest-deep in white, its chimney coughing thin smoke into the frozen air. Inside, Ethan Cole sat by the window, rifle on his lap, eyes on the tree line. The world was silent again, too silent. Snow had that way of smothering sound, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Behind him, Mara stirred. She was sitting up now, her shoulder bandaged, her dark hair pulled back from her face. The firelight caught flecks of amber in her gray-green eyes, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and said too little. She moved with careful precision, as if her body obeyed orders her mind no longer gave. "You sleep?" Ethan asked without turning. "Some," she said. "Not well." "Storm's lifting," he replied. "We can dig out by noon." Mara watched his reflection in the frosted glass. "You think someone's looking for me? Should they be?" A small, humorless smile crossed her lips. "Depends who you ask." Rex lay by the fire, head resting on his paws, but one eye stayed open, fixed on her. His tail never moved. Ethan trusted that more than words. Dogs saw the truth long before men did. When Ethan finally turned, He studied her in silence. She wasn't fragile the way some women looked after near death. Her face was calm, but her hands were restless, fidgeting, rubbing the fabric of the blanket like she was grounding herself in something real. Soldiers did that after firefights. Civilians didn't. "You handled that wound like you've done it before," he said. "I've had worse." "That so?" "Everyone has, out there." She didn't explain what out there meant, and he didn't ask. Some words belonged to deserts and battlefields, not mountains. He poured her a cup of coffee, black and steaming. She accepted it with a quiet, "Thanks." Her fingers wrapped around the tin mug, but her eyes kept drifting to the mantel, to the pocket watch, its frozen hands still pointing at 3:47. "That belonged to your brother," she said, not a question. Ethan nodded. "Bo." She hesitated. "He was Army?" "Was," Ethan said. "Tried to bring something to light. Never made it out of Dry Ridge." Mara's throat tightened. What was he trying to bring out? He met her gaze evenly. "The kind of truth that gets men killed." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she looked down at her hands, her expression flickering with something like shame or fear. Maybe he wasn't the only one. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you know about Dry Ridge?" Mara's lips parted, then closed. "Just that it's gone, like it never existed." "That's not an answer." She met his stare. "And you wouldn't believe the real one." Silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of fire and the soft groan of snow sliding from the roof. Rex stood, moving. Between them, his tail stiff, eyes sharp. He sat facing the door, as if expecting something. Ethan's hand drifted toward his rifle on instinct. "Easy, boy," he murmured, but Rex didn't relax. Then Mara spoke again, quieter now. "There were names, files, people marked for silence. Some of them never made it home." Her voice trembled, barely. "Sometimes I hear their names in my sleep." Ethan's chest tightened. "You were there." Mara didn't answer. He stood, pacing toward the fire. "If you came here looking for something, you should have just said." "I didn't come here for you," she said sharply. "I came because I thought I could fix what I broke." Ethan turned, eyes narrowing. "Fix what?" Before she could speak, the wind howled outside, a low, moaning sound that wasn't quite the storm. It came again, longer, higher, a whistle. Rex's ears shot up, a growl building in his throat. Ethan crossed to the window. In the distance, through thinning snow, a dark speck moved near the ridge. Then another. Figures. 3, maybe 4, descending from the tree line. He grabbed the binoculars from the shelf. The glass fogged, then cleared. The men wore parkas, hoods up, moving with the precision of hunters. One carried a rifle slung low. Another scanned with a scope. "Looks like someone's looking for you after all," Ethan said. Mara's face drained of color. No, they can't be here already." "You know them?" She didn't answer, but the way her eyes darted said enough. Ethan set the binoculars down. "You got maybe a minute to tell me the truth before I decide what to do next." Her breathing quickened. "They work for him," she said. "Colonel Everett Gaines. He was our commanding officer. He runs a security firm now, with contracts in half the state. The men who killed your brother, they were under his command." The words hit him like a strike to the gut. "You're saying Bo's death wasn't random," she finished softly. "It was an order, from him, from Gaines." Ethan's jaw clenched. The name felt like acid in his mouth. "And you?" he asked quietly. "You follow those orders too?" Her silence was the answer he feared. Outside, the figures were closer now. He could see the black of their rifles against the snow. "Get down!" he ordered. Mara slid off the chair, pressing herself against the wall. Ethan blew out the lantern, grabbed his rifle, and crouched by the window. The cabin dimmed into darkness. Only the fire's ember glowed, faint and red. Through the glass he saw them pause, scanning, searching. One raised a hand pointing toward the cabin. The others fanned out. Rex was a statue beside him, muscles coiled, eyes burning in the dark. Ethan's finger hovered near the trigger. "If they cross that ridge," he whispered, "they won't get a warning." Mara's voice was barely a breath. "You can't. Fight them all." "I don't plan to," he said. "I just plan to make sure they remember coming." Minutes passed like hours. The men lingered near the tree line, speaking in gestures Ethan couldn't read. Then, as sudden as they'd appeared, they turned, moving west, back into the fog. Only when they vanished did Ethan lower the rifle. He kept watching anyway. When the silence returned, it was heavier than before. He turned toward Mara. "You brought this here." "I didn't mean to." "But you did." She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw fear that wasn't for herself. "If he knows I'm alive," she whispered, "he won't stop until I'm not." Ethan looked at her, then at Rex, who still stood by the door, waiting for a command. The storm was dying, but the war outside had just begun. The storm had finally broken. A thin blue light crept through the frosted window panes, turning the room pale and silent. The air smelled of ash and cold iron. Ethan Cole stood at the stove, stirring a pot of coffee that had long since boiled down to bitterness. Behind him, Mara Hale sat at the table, her face half-shadowed, eyes fixed on the fire, as if she could burn the past out of herself by staring hard enough. Neither had spoken since dawn. The night before had stripped them of pretense. The moment Ethan had seen the men outside, the fragile lie between them had shattered like ice underfoot. Finally, Ethan set the pot down, poured 2 cups, and slid one toward her. "You said they work for Colonel Gaines," he said quietly. "Start there." Mara didn't touch the cup. "You wouldn't believe half of it." "Try me." Her gaze lifted, tired, steady. 3 years ago, I was working as a contractor for a private military outfit called Black Vulture Security. Officially, we handled containment operations for the Army, illegal arms, deserters, insurgent leaks. In reality, we were cleaners. Gaines ran the operation through a shell company after he retired from the service. His job wasn't to stop corruption. It was to bury it. Ethan's jaw tightened. "And Bo?" Her throat worked. He and his men intercepted a convoy in Dry Ridge. They were carrying documents, evidence tying Gaines to money laundering and black market contracts in the Middle East. Gaines found out. He sent us to erase them. The silence afterward was so deep, Ethan could hear the faint creak of snow sliding off the roof. "You pulled the trigger?" His voice was low, too calm. She met his stare head-on. "No, but I was there. I sighted through the scope. Another sniper took the shot. My job was overwatch." Ethan turned away, pacing toward the window. The glass reflected his face like something carved from stone. "And you waited 3 years to feel sorry?" Mara's tone didn't rise. "I waited 3 years to survive long enough to do something about it. The second I tried to come forward, Gaines sent men after me. That map you found, it wasn't to run, it was to find what Bo hid before he died." "What did he hide?" She reached slowly into her duffel, unzipped a side pocket, and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed and worn soft at the edges. "This," she said, placing it on the table. Ethan didn't move. The handwriting on the envelope froze him in place. Bo Cole. He recognized the slant, the pressure of the pen. "Your brother wrote this before he died," Mara said. "He handed it to one of his men, told him to mail it if he didn't make it out. That man died 2 hours later. The letter ended up in an evidence crate we recovered after the mission. I kept it." Ethan's fingers trembled as he opened it. The ink had bled slightly from moisture, but the words were clear. "If you're reading this, something went wrong. Gaines isn't who he says he is. I've hidden proof under the hearth at Wind River. Don't trust anyone in uniform." At the bottom, Beau's initials, BC 347. Ethan stared at the number, the same time frozen on the watch above the mantel. His breath came shallow. "You knew about this?" "I didn't believe it was real," Mara said, "until Gaines started erasing everyone who'd been there. Jonas Reeve, our spotter. He vanished 2 years ago. The others, well, you saw what's left." Ethan stood abruptly. "Move." He crossed to the fireplace, grabbed the iron poker, and knelt beside the stone hearth. The bottom stones were old, dark with soot. He pried at the one near the back, the one slightly discolored. It shifted. Dust fell like ash. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small metal ledger, its surface blackened by heat. Mara rose slowly, watching as Ethan set it on the table and peeled the cloth away. Inside lay pages of hand-scrawled notes, coded numbers, and signatures. One name recurring again and again, Colonel Everett Gaines. Alongside it, supply manifests, weapon serials, coordinates, everything Beau must have died to protect. Ethan's chest constricted. "He wrote it all down." Mara's voice was a whisper. "Beau didn't just find proof. He built a case." Rex, who had been lying near the door, suddenly stood, ears pricking. He sniffed the air, tail rigid. Ethan looked up. "What is it?" The dog gave a low growl, moving toward the wall near the chimney. Mara frowned. "He smells something." Ethan crouched, running his hand along the baseboard. His fingers brushed something slick, oil, fresh. He grabbed the lantern and tilted it forward. Beneath the log rack, a thin smear of gun oil glistened on the floorboards. He exchanged a look with Mara. "Someone's been here." She reached for her pistol, the one Ethan had unloaded and left on the shelf. "When?" "Last night, maybe. Could have been before the storm closed in." Rex began pacing near the door, nose twitching. His hackles rose. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Grab your pack, we can't stay." But before they could move, a dull thud sounded outside, the crunch of boots on ice. Then another. Mara snatched the rifle from the wall, moving beside him. Through the small window, Ethan glimpsed shadows shifting among the trees. "They found us," she whispered. Ethan doused the lantern. The cabin sank into half-darkness, lit only by the low burn of the fire. They waited. The wind howled once, then stilled, like the world was holding its breath again. Minutes passed. No more sound. Then, from somewhere close, a soft metallic click. The unmistakable sound of a rifle bolt being drawn back. Ethan grabbed Mara's arm and pulled her toward the back room. "Out the trapdoor," he whispered. "Now." Rex followed silently, muscles taut. They slipped through the floor hatch, into the crawl space. Snow and dirt pressed cold against their faces as Ethan eased the panel shut above them. Through the thin boards, he heard the door creak open, footsteps entering. 2 voices. Male, low, deliberate. "Nothing here," one said. "Tracks end at the ridge." "Check the floor. Gaines said they'd have it." The sound of boots scraping, furniture shifting. Then, "Found something?" The man's tone sharpened. The ledger. Mara clenched her fists. Ethan held her still. Another voice. "Bag it. Burn the rest." The footsteps retreated. The door slammed. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of burning wood as fire caught where they'd poured accelerant. Smoke began to seep through the cracks above. Ethan looked at Mara. "We move now." They crawled through the narrow passage, Rex leading, until the tunnel opened behind the woodpile. They emerged into the open air just as the cabin's roof groaned and collapsed inward. Flames bloomed orange against the snow. Mara turned back, her face lit by the blaze. "Everything's gone." Ethan shook his head. "Not everything." He patted his jacket pocket, inside the pages he'd torn from Beau's ledger before the attack. Mara stared at him, disbelief and something like respect in her eyes. "You thought they'd come." "I've been waiting 3 years for them to." Rex barked once, short and sharp. Ethan looked toward the ridge, where dark smoke curled into the gray sky. "They'll think we died in there," he said. "Let's make sure they keep thinking it." And with that, they turned north, the snow swallowing their tracks, the burning cabin behind them lighting the valley like a funeral pyre. By the time the flames died, only blackened beams and drifting smoke marked where the cabin had stood. The snow around it melted into gray slush, then froze again in the morning cold. Ethan Cole stood among the ruins, face unreadable, smoke curling around his jacket like ghostly fingers. Beside him, Mara Hale stared in silence, her breath fogging the air. The fire had taken nearly everything: the stove, the journal's cover, the warmth of his last home. But inside Ethan's coat, tucked against his chest, were 5 torn pages that survived. Pages written in Beau's hand. Rex padded through the ash, nose low, tail stiff. He circled back, pressing against Ethan's leg. The dog's fur was smudged with soot, but his eyes were alert, ready, waiting. Mara adjusted the strap of her rifle. "We can't stay. They'll send someone to check the wreck." Ethan didn't answer at first. He looked east, where dawn crept pale and merciless over the ridges. "You said Cheyenne," he said finally. "Fort Laramie's halfway. There's a federal office there. You think they'll listen?" "They have to," Mara said. "Kinsman's there. Major Daniel Kinsman. Beau knew him. He was one of the few who tried to stand up to Gaines before it all went quiet." Ethan nodded once, decision made. "Then we go." The journey began before sunrise. They moved through snowfields that glittered with ice and silence, cutting north along the frozen Wind River. The temperature stayed below zero, the air so cold it burned their lungs. Every sound carried far: the creak of boots, the crunch of frozen brush, the occasional caw of a raven overhead. By midday, clouds had gathered again, heavy and gray. A storm was building somewhere beyond the mountains. Mara kept scanning the horizon, her posture rigid. "We'll need cover by nightfall," she said. "There's a ranger station a few miles west." Ethan replied, "Abandoned years ago. We can rest there." Rex barked once, short and sharp. Ethan froze. The dog was standing ahead of them, ears pricked, gaze fixed on the trail behind. Ethan knelt, pressing his gloved hand into the snow. Tracks, fresh ones, overlapping their own. Human. At least 3 pairs. "They're still on us," he said. Mara's expression hardened. "Gaines doesn't waste time." They pressed on, faster now, moving through the dense forest. The wind picked up, carrying the faint metallic tang of snow and smoke. By the time they reached the ranger station, a half-collapsed cabin near the tree line, the first flakes were falling again. Inside, the air was damp and stale. Old maps still clung to the walls, their corners curled. Ethan checked the corners, found a rusted stove and a few empty cans, relics of men long gone. Rex sniffed the floorboards, then settled near the door, silent and watchful. As they worked to build a small fire, Mara pulled out a battered radio from her pack, a shortwave transceiver, the kind used by field units years ago. She connected wires, adjusted knobs, then turned the crank until static filled the air. Ethan looked up. You think anyone's still listening on that frequency? Gaines used to, she said. If we're lucky, maybe his people will give themselves away. The static hissed and popped. For several minutes, nothing. Then a voice broke through, faint but clear enough. Search teams converging. Last signal near Union Pass. Report of unidentified survivors heading south. Priority target. Female, mid-30s, dark hair, possible possession of classified materials. Mara's knuckles went white around the radio. Ethan took the receiver gently from her hands, lowering the volume. They know you're alive. They'll expect us to run east toward the towns. Then we go west. Mara met his gaze. West is suicide. No roads, no signal. Exactly. She stared at him a moment longer, then nodded. All right, Sergeant, lead the way. They left at dusk, following the frozen creek bed through a narrow ravine. The light faded fast, turning the snow blue and the sky black. The wind screamed through the pines, and even Rex moved quietly now, his ears flicking back with every gust. After 2 hours, the storm thickened into whiteout conditions. They could barely see 10 feet ahead. Mara stumbled once, catching herself on Ethan's arm. You ever think, she muttered through clenched teeth, you should have stayed in that cabin? Let the world burn itself down without you? Ethan almost smiled. Every day. They found shelter beneath an overhang of rock, lighting a small fire with the last of the dry kindling. The flames threw weak light across their faces. Ethan's hard edges, Mara's drawn exhaustion, Rex's steady eyes reflecting the glow. Mara pulled the torn pages from Ethan's coat, spreading them out carefully. We'll need to copy these before the ink fades. Ethan nodded, handing her his field notebook. She began transcribing, her handwriting neat and deliberate, even with trembling fingers. Beau's words filled the silence. Dates, names, locations, evidence strong enough to ruin careers, maybe topple an empire. When she finished, Ethan took the originals, folded them tight, and slipped them into a sealed pouch. He dug into the snow beneath the rock ledge, burying it deep before covering the spot with a flat stone. If we don't make it, he said quietly, someone will find it. Mara watched him, her face unreadable. You always think that far ahead? He looked at her. I learned from a man who didn't get the chance to. They sat without speaking for a while. The fire hissed. Wind howled through the cracks above. Then Rex's head lifted again, ears rigid. Ethan froze. What is it? From somewhere down the ravine came a faint echo, muffled footsteps, the crunch of snow, then a metallic click. 3 of them, Ethan whispered. Close. He motioned Mara to kill the fire. The sudden darkness pressed in like a weight. Rex growled low, the sound deep and warning. Ethan peered out through the snow curtain. Shadows moved below, 3 figures, rifles slung, moving in a triangular formation. Their flashlights swept briefly over the ravine wall, then vanished. They're sweeping, Mara breathed. Ethan's mind worked fast. They'll set camp soon. We can't keep running blind. We hit them before dawn. Mara frowned. There's 3 of them. We're 2 and a dog. Ethan's mouth curved faintly. That's 1 too many for them. She almost laughed despite herself. You're insane. Maybe. He checked his rifle, chambering around. But I'm tired of running. Outside, the snow fell thicker, cloaking the forest in silence. The world narrowed to the rhythm of their breathing, the faint creak of metal, and the promise of violence waiting just beyond the dark. Dawn broke pale and cold over the ravine, light spreading thin as glass across the frozen world. The storm had calmed, but the silence that followed was heavier, almost sacred. Ethan Cole crouched behind a snowbank overlooking the camp below. 3 men huddled near a small fire, armed, restless, their breath ghosting the air. They looked like contractors, heavy coats, military boots, the quiet arrogance of men paid to hunt. Mara Hale lay beside him, rifle cradled in her arms. Her face was set, pale, under the bruised light. The scar above her eyebrow caught a flicker of dawn. "You sure about this?" she whispered. Ethan's eyes didn't leave the targets. "They'll find us by noon if we wait." We hit first. Rex lay crouched behind them, his body still as carved stone, muscles coiled beneath his sable fur. He seemed to sense the danger, his amber eyes locked on the movement below. Mara exhaled slowly, breath trembling in the air. "You take the left and right. I'll call one out." Ethan gave a single nod. The rhythm was military, the kind that didn't need orders, only trust. Below, one of the men stood, stretching. The other two laughed quietly at something he said. They didn't expect company. Ethan steadied his rifle. Years fell away, the deserts, the noise, the smell of cordite and blood. The weight of the weapon felt familiar, almost merciful. He found the first man's chest through the scope, drew a breath, and squeezed. The sound was swallowed by snow. The man dropped instantly. The camp erupted. The remaining two dove for cover, shouting. Mara's voice rang sharp through the air. "Don't move!" Her shot followed, catching the second man in the shoulder. He spun and fell, cursing. The third fired blindly toward the ridge, bullets chewing into the snow near Ethan's position. "Go!" Ethan barked. Rex bolted forward, a blur against the white. The last man barely had time to turn before the dog hit him full force, knocking the rifle aside. The snow exploded in a chaos of snarls and shouts. Ethan slid down the slope, boots cutting through ice, reaching them in seconds. He kicked the rifle away, grabbed the man's arm, and pinned him down. The fight was short, ugly, efficient. When it was over, two lay still, and one was breathing hard, bleeding from a graze on his thigh. Mara approached, rifle steady, but eyes unflinching. "Who sent you?" The man laughed hoarsely, teeth red with blood. "You already know." "Gaines," she said flatly. He smiled wider. "He says hello." Ethan tightened his grip. "How far behind is he?" The man's gaze flickered toward the trees. "Closer than you think." Ethan's fist struck once, hard enough to silence him without killing. "We move." Mara crouched, checking the man's wound. "He'll live." "Leave him something," Ethan said. "We're not them." She pulled a small bandage pack from her pocket, pressed it to the wound, then rose. "He won't thank you." "Not asking him to." Ethan wiped his rifle clean, scanning the ridge. "We head over the pass. Shoshone Trail connects to the Fort Road. We keep west of the highway. No tracks." The climb was brutal. The higher they went, the thinner the air grew, and the colder it bit. Wind sliced through every layer of clothing, carrying the taste of snow and iron. The mountains stretched endless and indifferent. Mara stumbled once, catching herself on a rock, blood from her split lip freezing instantly. Ethan glanced back. "You good?" She nodded, breathless. "Fine." Rex moved ahead, breaking the trail through drifts that reached his chest. Every few minutes he stopped, glancing back as if to make sure they were still following. His endurance was a miracle of instinct and loyalty. By midday, the clouds darkened again. The horizon vanished behind sheets of blowing snow. The world narrowed to white and breath. Ethan's shoulder throbbed from the recoil, but he ignored it. They reached a small ridge overlooking a frozen lake, flat, glittering, silent. "Down there," he said. "If we're lucky, the ice will hide our prints." They crossed carefully, boots creaking on the frozen surface. Halfway across, Mara stopped, looking back toward the peaks. "Ethan." He turned. Far above, small figures were moving along the ridge they'd left. 3, maybe 4 more. "Company," he muttered. "They don't quit easy." They hurried across the ice, slipping into the tree line, on the far side. The forest swallowed them, shadows stretching long in the pale light. Snow fell heavier now, muting every sound. They found an old trapper's hut near the tree line, a single-room shack with half a roof and a broken stove. It would have to do. Ethan pushed the door shut against the wind and slumped against the wall, exhausted. Mara sat opposite him, shivering despite the fire he lit. Her hands trembled as she poured water from the canteen. "You think Gaines really believes we died in that fire?" "He'll hope we did," Ethan said, "but hope's not the same as proof." Mara managed a small smile. "You sound like Bo." He looked at her, surprised. "You knew him better than you said." She nodded slowly. He was the only officer who treated locals like people. Once in Kandahar, he stopped a convoy because a boy ran into the road chasing a goat. Everyone screamed at him for it. He didn't care. Said if we start forgetting small things, we'll forget the big ones next. Ethan stared at the fire, his throat tight. That sounds like him. Mara's voice softened. "You still carry his watch." He reached into his pocket, the cracked glass glinting in the flame. "Hasn't moved since the day he died." "Maybe it's waiting," she said quietly. "For what?" "For you to stop fighting the past." Before Ethan could answer, Rex's low growl cut through the air. He stood by the door, nose to the crack. Ethan moved fast, dousing the fire. They found us again. Through the slit of the wall, he saw movement, silhouettes among the trees. Gaines's men had tracked them through the snow. Mara chambered around. "We can't keep running." "Then we don't." Outside, snow swirled under a leaden sky. The first shot came from the ridge, sparking off the metal stove. Wood splintered. Rex barked once, furious. Ethan rolled to the window, returned fire, then ducked. "Two on the left." Mara moved to cover the flank. Her shot cracked sharp, and one silhouette dropped. Another circled wide, firing as he moved. Bullets ripped through the doorframe. Ethan rose, aimed carefully, and fired. Silence followed. For a long minute nothing moved but the falling snow. Then faintly the sound of retreating boots faded into the forest. Ethan lowered his rifle, breathing hard. "That's it. They're pulling back." Mara sank to her knees, exhaustion overtaking her. Rex limped to her side, pressing his head against her arm. She smiled faintly and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy." Ethan checked his shoulder. Blood seeped through the torn jacket, but the wound was shallow. Mara noticed. "You're bleeding." "I've had worse." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's my line." He sank beside her, the tension slowly ebbing. Outside, the snow began to glow faintly with the first shimmer of dawn breaking through the clouds. Mara leaned back against the wall, her voice barely above a whisper. "When this is over, what'll you do?" Ethan looked at the watch again, its hands frozen in their eternal moment. "Maybe wind it. Maybe see if time still works." She smiled, eyes closing. "I think it will." Outside, far beyond the pass, a faint red-white light flickered through the mist, the beacon tower near Fort Laramie. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something close to belief. They weren't out of danger yet, but they were close enough to see what hope looked like. By the time they reached the plains, the snow had softened into a mist that glowed faintly under the morning sun. The mountain peaks behind them were ghostly shapes, fading into light. Ethan Cole walked with a steady limp, his shoulder bandaged tight beneath his jacket. Beside him, Mara Hale kept her rifle slung low, her breath visible in the cold. Rex trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail flicking with cautious purpose. They had been walking for hours when they saw the first sign of life, a rusted sign half buried in snow. Fort Laramie, 8 miles. Ethan stopped. The words hit harder than any bullet. He turned to Mara. "We're close." She nodded. "If the storm doesn't turn again." But the sky, for once, was clear. The light was thin but true. By noon, the faint outlines of Fort Laramie came into view, a cluster of low stone buildings, flagpole rising above them, the American flag hanging limp in still air. The fort looked both old and alive, a scar that refused to fade. As they approached, 2 armed sentries stepped forward. Their uniforms were federal issue, but their eyes carried the same wary fatigue as Ethan's. "Identify yourselves," one called out. "Ethan Cole," he answered, raising his hands. "U.S. Army, retired. This woman needs to speak with Major Daniel Kinsman. It's urgent." The soldiers exchanged a look. "Kinsman's in command post. We'll take you." Inside, warmth hit them like a wave. The scent of coffee, gun oil, and old paper filled the narrow hallways. Ethan felt the strange ache of familiarity. Discipline and duty, things he'd tried to bury. They were led into an office with a desk scarred by years of service. Behind it sat a tall man in a crisp uniform, hair silver at the temples, posture straight but not stiff. His eyes, gray-blue, sharp but kind, lifted from a report. "Cole," he said, standing. "Beau's brother." Ethan blinked. "You knew him?" Kinsman nodded. "Served 2 tours together. I was at his memorial. Didn't believe the official story then. Don't believe it now." His gaze shifted to Mara. "And you must be Mara Hale. I've been hearing that name on intercepted transmissions all week." Mara stiffened. "Then you know why we're here." "Sit," Kinsman said simply. "Tell me everything." Ethan placed the waterproof pouch on the desk. Inside were the 5 surviving pages from Beau's ledger, the letter, and Mara's written confession. Kinsman spread them out carefully, reading line by line. His face didn't move, but his jaw tightened with every paragraph. When he finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "You understand what this means. These records tie Colonel Everett Gaines to illegal operations, embezzlement, and murder. If we can verify this, it won't just end his career, it'll open an investigation that might burn half the boardrooms in Washington." Ethan's voice was steady. "Then light the match." Kinsman met his eyes. "You're both under protective custody until the trial. Gaines has reach, political, military, financial. He won't go quietly." Mara folded her arms. "I'm not hiding again." "You won't have to," Kinsman said. "I'll make sure of it." 3 days later, the trial began in Cheyenne's federal courthouse. Snow still lined the streets, but inside, the air was charged with something sharper than cold. Truth breaking through. Ethan testified first, his voice calm, unflinching as he described the ambush at Dry Ridge, Beau's warnings, the journal, and the fire that nearly consumed the evidence. Mara spoke after him. Her confession was quiet, stripped of self-defense. "I followed orders," she said, eyes fixed on the judge. "I believed what I was told, that we were protecting national interests. I didn't know the truth until it was too late. And when I did, I ran, because I couldn't live with it." The courtroom was silent. Even Gaines, seated at the defense table in a tailored suit, seemed smaller under the fluorescent lights. His silver hair gleamed, his smile was brittle. When the prosecutor displayed Beau's ledger, Beau's handwriting, his expression cracked for the first time. After 6 hours of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came down. Colonel Everett Gaines, guilty of conspiracy, treason, and multiple counts of murder, life imprisonment without parole. He stood as the sentence was read, face pale, hands shaking once before he masked it. As the guards led him away, his gaze met Ethan's. There was no anger there, only a cold recognition, one soldier to another who had chosen the opposite path. When it was over, Kinsman found Ethan outside on the courthouse steps. Snow fell lightly, the kind that didn't stick, just shimmered in the air. "You did your brother proud," he said. "Bo wanted the truth out. You gave him that." Ethan looked down the street, where the lights of Cheyenne flickered through the dusk. "It wasn't just me," Kinsman smiled faintly. "No, it rarely is." He extended a hand. "You ever decide to come back, we could use men like you again." Ethan shook his head. "I think I've seen enough uniforms for one lifetime." "Fair enough." Kinsman tipped his hat. "Then take what peace you can find." 2 weeks later, Ethan was back in Wind River, or what was left of it. The cabin was gone, only a black scar in the snow where it had stood. He'd rebuilt part of the foundation, a wall, a roofline taking shape again, wood smelling of pine and smoke. Mara was there, sleeves rolled up, hammering planks into place with quiet focus. Rex lay by the half-rebuilt porch, muzzle gray with soot, but tail thumping lazily. "Roof's crooked," Ethan said from behind her. She didn't look up. "You build it then." He smiled faintly, took the hammer, and began working beside her. The sound of nails sinking into wood echoed through the cold air, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat returning after too long. By dusk, the cabin stood again, rough but solid. Smoke curled from the chimney once more. Inside, the fire crackled, and for the first time in months, the room smelled of something like home. Ethan sat at the table, the same table he'd once cleaned rifles on, now scarred and ash-marked. On it lay Bo's pocket watch. He picked it up, thumb brushing the crack on the glass. It had survived the fire, though the chain was blackened. 3:47, he murmured. Mara looked over from the stove. "You ever wonder why it stopped there?" He turned the crown slowly, listening. Click, click. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a sound small as a heartbeat, the second hand shivered and began to move. Ethan froze, watching it tick once, twice, steady as breathing. He smiled, tired, real. Mara stepped beside him, eyes on the watch. "Guess time finally forgave you." "Maybe," he said softly, "or maybe it just waited for the truth." Rex lifted his head, ears twitching as the wind moved outside. Snowflakes drifted past the window, slow and gentle, not the kind that bury, but the kind that renew. Ethan slipped the watch back into his pocket. The ticking was faint but constant, blending with the crackle of fire and the sound of Mara's quiet laughter. For the first time in years, the silence of Wind River felt like peace instead of punishment. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive as lightning in the sky. They come quietly, in the form of second chances, a broken watch ticking again, a wounded soul learning to forgive. A man who thought his time had ended, discovering that love, truth, and faith were only waiting for him to believe once more. Ethan's cabin wasn't just rebuilt from ashes. It was redeemed. Every nail he drove, every breath he took beside the fire was proof that when we hold on to what is right, heaven finds its way through the snow to reach us. Maybe you've faced your own winter, a season where you thought hope was gone. But remember, God never stops working, even when everything seems silent. Sometimes the miracle isn't that He changes the storm, but that He changes us within it. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, so someone else who's standing in their own storm might find a bit of light too. Tell us in the comments what miracle of faith has ever found you. And before you go, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and whisper a prayer. May God bless every weary heart still waiting for spring, every soul fighting for truth, and every loyal friend, human or animal, who reminds us that love never dies. God bless you, my friends. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and may peace find its way to your doorstep tonight.